Here's hoping I can hold the camera long enough. One of the things that I think there's value in speaking to with respect to what can happen when you're trying to prepare information to share with the public about something that you're doing. So, in this case, talking about the schools, and this is me again sharing some of the simpler stuff that occurs when you're trying to run a school. So you've got some ideas, you're trying to share them with the world, generate a program. You're going to make a lot of errors in, not necessarily errors, but oversight in the things that you share. So I generated the curriculum for the Osteopathic Lyceum as what I call an integrated anatomy and physiology, but with the central portion of those being movements. So I want the center of the network of related meaning, or the center of the semantic network, to be movement. I'm not particularly concerned about teaching anatomy for the sake of teaching anatomy, which almost everybody's going to tell you that's not what they do. They're going to tell you that they're teaching you clinically focused anatomy or functional anatomy or something along those lines. But if it's not necessarily delivered in relation to how the person is going to interact with it, then there's all kinds of trouble. So clinicians don't interact with muscles. They interact with movements. So either they squish an area or they generate gross movement of a region, right? So either they have the patient move their neck all over the place, or they move the neck for the patient, or they apply pressure to try to get the soft tissues in the neck to yield. Either way, you're dealing with movements. You're not necessarily dealing with individuated structures, disembodied and explained in words as single units. And then you have these single units, say the SCM. You have to remember all of the movements of the SCM. And then you have to remember the nerves and the blood vessels and things like that. Whereas if you talk about cervical flexion, you talk about cervical extension, you talk about cervical side bending and rotation, a bunch of muscles, a bunch of nerves are going to come up multiple times. But what you're thinking about is, or you're priming, is thinking about the movements. You're not thinking about the structures. You're thinking about the movements, and then the structures sort of fall into place. Also, in doing that, because there is research that I happen to have had the opportunity to watch a talk from an author, a gentleman who was doing his PhD. The name is Dr. Jeffrey Chung. It was essentially integrating content and how was it? Content and basic science, or like a skill and the basic science behind it. So his studies were around lumbar puncture, and if you teach some of the underlying basic science of lumbar puncture, how does it impact the ability to transfer? So what they did is they had the lumbar puncture simulation in a normal position, and then they put it in an abnormal position. And if you integrate the basic science, the anatomy and why you would aim for a certain area and why you would, what the specific structures, the angles, things like that, it seemed that transfer improved. So essentially, that Dr. Chung, Dr. Nikki Woods, and some others, I think they're pretty much all at U of T, at the Wilson Center. What you seem to find is that, and also Dr. Jeffrey Norman, who is at Mac, and some other researchers at Mac have probably done some of this. But essentially, when you teach the basic science of something at the same time as you're teaching a skill, it seems to improve the network of related meaning, the semantic network, the ability to pull something into a novel situation. So all that is preamble to speak to a question that a new student asked. And the new student was asking about a specific movement and how I have integrated physiological topics into the movement. So on the anatomy side, it makes probably pretty easy sense why I would say, okay, we're going to talk about cervical flexion and then the muscles, nerves, arteries, veins, lymphatics around that. But then how did I integrate physiology and physiological topics? Well, generally speaking, in a particular region, you provide some physiological concept that lives in the region, or something that might be salient. So in the case of the neck, you can talk about the baroreceptor reflex, you can talk about the thyroid and the parathyroid. You can also talk to some degree, if you're looking at ways to describe the neurological system, you can talk about neurological diseases that would be a little bit more in the head. So anyways, there's a particular condition and a particular movement that are paired, and the student was asking whether or not we teach specific techniques for that particular condition. And the answer to any question about do you teach techniques for whatever condition, in almost all cases is no, you can't. The reason that somebody has maybe let's not start there. Let's start at, depending on the jurisdiction that you're in, you, as an osteopathic manual practitioner, don't have the legal right to diagnose any condition or treat any condition, right? Now, in other places, that's different. But if I can't diagnose it and I can't really treat it, then I can't teach techniques about it. So on the legal side, no, there's no techniques for any particular condition. But then, further to that, the condition itself often exists in a place and for a reason that is non-mechanical, at least insofar as we can tell now. If it was mechanical, then that condition, whatever condition you want to talk about, would change when manual treatment was applied to it. The fundamental prediction is if a person presents with a particular condition and I do whatever osteopathic methodology to them or hands-on methodology to them, then it should change. If it's not changing, if we see no evidence that it changes because of hands-on techniques, then there's no point in chasing that down in any way. Now, I don't want that to sound dismissive. What I want that to do is say that broadly, whatever condition you want to talk about, there's two reasons that there's no techniques for that condition, or three really. One, legal, right? We talked about that. Two, if there was, we would already see signals that it was responding well to hands-on treatment. The other is that just because somebody has a named condition doesn't mean that they are the same or that their condition is the same. There is variance between people for lots of reasons and lots of things. So we treat people, not conditions, for multiple reasons. One reason is people are different. They can have the same name condition, but the actual presentation can be different. So how can I teach you to do a particular move that will apply to everybody when not everybody's the same, right? I can teach a framework to search for and find mechanical restriction. And if that's going to benefit the person that has that condition, it will benefit them in whatever way it does. So it gives us a nice way to point to a fairly prescient statement that Dr. Still made, or at least is claimed to have made. He never wrote it down, but it is written down and attributed to him. Find it, fix it, leave it alone. Nature will kindly take care of the rest. So you find the thing that's not moving, you work on it, and if it properly relates to whatever's giving the person trouble, they'll change together. So I just wanted to make comment on that because the student asked the question in a very meaningful and earnest way because they're encountering the integrated curriculum and wondering if there's methods to deal with it. And maybe is it placed there because if we work on this particular movement, it'll impact this condition? The answer is no, but I wanted to touch on it because, as I noted at the beginning of this ramble, I will have internal conversations with myself that I won't necessarily have with the world, and then I sort of think that it's been explained, but it probably hasn't more often than not. So this offers me the opportunity to go ahead and explain some of it. Another concept that I think is poorly spoken about within osteopathy, especially in... What happened here? Oh, that's what happened. Sorry, just messing around with the Zoom. Another thing that I think is not necessarily particularly well discussed with respect to osteopathy in Canada is the concept of it being an unregulated profession. Unregulated doesn't mean no oversight. Unregulated simply means that there are no provincial government or federal government regulatory colleges. The oversight in osteopathy in Canada is essentially professional associations providing access to insurance companies. Now, I have my qualms with how insurance mediates healthcare, but that's how it stands. It stands that a school that can feed into a professional association or a set of professional associations that will represent osteopathic practitioners so that they can interface with the insurance companies is essentially how osteopathy has oversight. Now, that oversight is guided by the WHO document, then the CEN or the European Standards document, which has been adapted to the CSA document. It's some combination of those things depending on the particular professional association. There's variance, but there is a framework. Now, I have my criticisms of those frameworks, but that's neither here nor there for this. The thing that I'd like to point to is that the professional associations are holding standards up such that if a practitioner is behaving in accordance with those standards, they can maintain their membership and maintain the relationship with the insurance companies for billing purposes. If they're not doing that, then those professional associations would behave in a way where they would remove membership access. So then the practitioner would want to at least attempt to move to another professional association. But if you have been removed from a professional association for misconduct of any form, then you'll have a hard time getting liability insurance. You'll have a hard time getting membership into another professional association. So the other thing with osteopathy is that osteopathic practitioners, as unregulated healthcare practitioners, are subject to the criminal code. So if they behave poorly or maliciously with respect to a patient, the cops can get you. All right. So wanted to point to those things really roughly as really quick overviews because somebody else asked me a question. So I would sort of figure that people would know some of this stuff, but obviously it isn't necessarily known explicitly and broadly to the point that somebody can ask an appropriate question in an earnest way or a way where they genuinely are curious. They want to know the information because they didn't have any way to know it before. So hopefully this stands as a stamp, time marker, something like that, where I've said it out loud, and maybe this will change in the future. But right now, osteopathy is an unregulated profession, aka no regulatory colleges at any government level. But there are multiple layers of oversight, plus the cops can get you. So hopefully that does something for that.